doing a series, if you like, apologetics or answering the critics with some of the questions that they have on the existence of God, and also this subject of why does God allow evil and suffering. And if you haven't been here, well, maybe you've got to go online and have a look. There's 2 messages that have dealt with this. Now, this is part 3 of our topic. And people often ask, why doesn't God step up to the plate and do something about things that are happening in our world? And last week we looked at Habakkuk and the questions that he asked God, challenging him with his expectations and assumptions that if he were in the place of God, that he could do a better job of things than what God was doing. But as we found out, Habakkuk had to go back and evaluate just what he knew about God and how he operated. And we found that he embraced his purposes and plans. And the same challenge is there for believers who struggle with similar sorts of problems. And I want us to look tonight at the positive explanations that we can give for why the world is the way it is. Oops. And that's the positive explanations. And these are given, and there's reams and reams and reams of them, and books written by theologians that give us some explanations to the questions, but they don't give the complete answer. And what I've called the first cause is this. Adam and Eve are the first cause. Now, as we read, I think I've got this up. In Genesis, we have a number of verses, and they're on the board, you can follow them. We read in Genesis 1:26, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And so what we're told, God created Adam and Eve in his own image, with the ability to make rational choices. And that's what every person is able to do, to make rational choices. And there will be people who argued, well, why didn't God create a perfect world without pain and suffering? Valid question? What's the answer? If we know our Bibles, did God create a perfect world? He did. He created a perfect world, but it didn't last long. In Genesis 1:31, and God saw everything that he made, and behold, it was very good. Not just good, it was very good. So God did not create evil, but rather he created the possibility of evil when he created human beings. God gave Adam and Eve some boundaries. He clearly told them what they could and couldn't do. And in Genesis 2:16-17, you may surely eat of every tree of the garden, but of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil you shall not eat. For in the day that you eat of it, you shall surely die. Pretty plain? That's a good boundary. Do anything you want, but here's the boundary. Don't do this. By choosing to defy and disobey God's standards, and ever since that day, every one of us has been born with the same ability to make choices and with the same rebellious, if you like, bent towards doing the wrong thing. For a relationship to be meaningful, it must be freely chosen. For a relationship to be freely chosen, there must be the possibility of it being rejected. And whenever there is the possibility of rejecting a relationship, there is also the possibility of pain and suffering. And we know that in our relationships that we have with one another. I mean, I can go back the first time I asked a girl out to go on a date, and guess what she said? No. It wasn't, oh, no. She just said, no. Did that hurt? Did I suffer? Did I start questioning? Yes. What was wrong with me? And so it can bring pain and suffering through relationship because we've got the possibilities of saying yes and no. So there's going to be pain and suffering. We make choices, and sometimes those choices, they're the wrong choices, and they will hurt people as well. Now, by choosing to defy and disobey God's standards, every one of us has been born with that same ability. Sometimes we suffer because of the choices we make. And when sinful people make decisions, God allows them. And sometimes those consequences result in bad things happening not only to us, but also to others. You see, you can't be a person in isolation. Everything you do has a flow-on effect to other people. And you might say, well, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody, it's okay. Problem is, it hurts a lot of people. Now, the earth is an environment of disease and death. And it's interesting, before Adam and Eve made their choice to rebel against God, there were no earthquakes, there were no hurricanes, there were no tsunamis, there were no natural disasters or diseases. But when they sinned, creation was cursed. Genetic disorders, multiple disease were unleashed to do their work of destruction. Pain and death became part of the human experience, and we're experiencing it ever since. Now listen to how God describes the consequences of their decision in Genesis 3:17 and 18. Then God said to the man, "You listened to what your wife said. You ate fruit from the tree which I commanded you not to eat. So I'll put a curse on the ground. You'll have to work very hard for your food. In pain you'll eat its food, and all the days of your life the ground will produce thorns and weeds for you, and you will eat the plants of the field." Have you ever wondered why we as human beings have to work? It's a curse because of sin, the sweat of our brows. Sin resulted in personal guilt and shame. It also resulted in alienation from God and others, and also a disruption of nature. And in Romans 8:22, it describes the present state, if you like, of our planet. For we know that the whole of creation has been groaning together in pains of childbirth until now. What does that actually mean? We read it, but what does it mean? Oh, I know, global warming. That's what it means, isn't it? No, it doesn't mean global warming. The entire world is groaning under the pressure of God's judgment. This was all set in motion the moment Adam and Eve defied God's boundaries. Because of Adam and Eve's sin, every person, along with the whole planet, is suffering. Now, the theologians say God isn't responsible for evil and suffering. Adam and Eve are. And it makes sense. But you know what? It raises another question. Why did God allow Adam and Eve the option of making sinful choices if he created them? So it doesn't completely answer the question. Because if God knew they were going to make those kinds of choices, then why did he make them capable of making those kinds of choices? Now we could go on and say, well, he created us with a free will and they're responsible. And God didn't create robots. But it doesn't completely answer the question. Now the second cause, what would you say if I said to you, the devil is responsible for all the evil in the world? Is that true? You're not sure. Simple answer, yes or no. Why do I sin and do bad things? The devil made me do it. Yeah? Man, we're quiet tonight. The second cause that the theologians tell us is the devil is the reason why there's sin and there's suffering and evil in the world. Many bad things happen as a result of the devil's destructive designs. He is ultimately behind all the hatred, the war, oppression and evil in the world. He is responsible for inflaming our passions and prompts us to make bad choices. That's why I said the devil made me do it. Problem is, I had a choice whether I wanted to or not. I didn't have to, but I did. Now, he might have influenced me, but guess who's responsible for the decision? I am. You are. Nobody else. In John 8:44, I think this is up here. The scripture tells us he was a murderer from the beginning. He does not stand in the truth because there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks out of his own character, for he is a liar and the father of lies. So theologians will tell us that Satan was the cause of all the evil and suffering in the world. But that presents another problem. Why did God create angels knowing that they would fall and that one of them would become the devil and lead the whole human race into sin? Oh. If he knew he was going to make those choices and lead to those issues, why did he make the devil? And since he's the creator who created them from nothing, he could have made them any way he wanted to make them. So why did he do it? You see, it doesn't answer the full question. So there are two causes that theologians tell us. Now this is the third cause. There's Adam and Eve, there is the devil, and the third cause is this: God. God is sovereign. He's in control. He weaves his way and will through suffering. God is good even when bad things happen, but some of God's reasons are beyond our capacity to understand. And God puts it like this in Isaiah 55:9. He says, "For as the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways and my thoughts than your thoughts." So with the sovereignty of God, all things are under the reign and rule of God. Nothing happens without his permission or direction. And that's why if we look at Romans 8:28, this is a promise that many Christians will hang on to. And we know that for those who love God, all things work together for what? Good. For those who are called according to his purpose. So we're told God is working all things out for his glory and for the ultimate good of those who are called to live out his purposes. So in looking to answer the question of why does God allow suffering and evil and pain in our world, it all comes back to God. You cannot put the blame totally on Adam and Eve or the devil. Ultimately, you have to come back to God for the answer. And that then we must ask ourselves, who and what is God? What are his purposes and plans? And you would still have to answer those questions as to why. If God knew Adam and Eve would have free will and yet make stupid choices, why did he make them capable of doing that? Once again, you have to come up with an assumption or some speculation. You come up with a God who you have imagined, a God who has limited knowledge, a God who has limited power, a God who wants us to do what we want rather than what he wants. And all of those things tell us that is not the God of the Bible. The Bible says God is all-knowing. He's all-powerful. It tells us that evil exists. God willed evil to exist. He didn't create it. That would be impossible for him to do any evil. But he willed it exist. And you have to ask, why would he allow that? And one of the reasons is that he puts his righteousness on display by the way that he confronts and deals with sin. But once again, the question all comes back to the person and nature of God. Now, we're going to look very quickly at the problem exposed, because we tend to have all these problems or questions that the critics ask, and we seem to think that we have to defend God. We don't have to defend God. God's more than capable of defending himself. But throughout his word, we do have people, as we have seen in Habakkuk, and now tonight we're going to see that even Job, his faithful servant, had questions and asked those questions. You see, our problem is, well, what is our problem as human beings? What do you expect from this life? Well, that's wonderful. You don't expect anything. If you don't expect anything, guess what? You're not going to get it. What do you expect in this life? How many of you just want to be happy? How many of you just want to be comfortable? How many of us somehow think we deserve good things? How many of us think that God owes us an easy life? Nobody here would they? I'll bet that's what you say to yourself. But I bet that's what you think. And what that says is, I think that I'm entitled to deserve good things. God owes me some good things. And of course, when things don't work out the way that I expect or the way that I want, what do? What do you do when things don't go your way or work out the way you thought you had it all planned out? You crack a wobbly, don't you? You have a big whinge. You look for the complaints box. God, why? Why is it happening to me? I didn't ask for this. I don't deserve this. Please explain yourself. Isn't that what we do? Or what we think? We wonder why bad things happen. Yet Jesus reminds us we're fallen individuals. We live in a fallen world. If we look at the example of suffering as recorded in the Bible, the first book we go to is the book of Job. It's a study of human suffering. It chronicles the life of a man who underwent extreme misery. Now, most of us will never experience the misery that Job did. Job lost everything. He lost his job, he lost his possessions, he lost his family, he lost his health, he lost his friends, and we know him as Job. Hard times we used to stretch him, to equip him, to teach him, and to reach him. Yet Job's trust wavered. He mourned. As you look through the book of Job, he mourned, he protested, he questioned, he even cursed the day he was born. He desperately wanted to know why all these bad things had happened to him. God answered him, but not in the way that he expected. If we look at Job, these were his that he lists here for us. Job says, "How I wish that I might have what I ask for, and that God would give me what I hope for. How I wish God would crush me and reach out his hand to destroy me. Then I would have this comfort and be glad even in this unending pain, because I would know I did not reject the words of the Holy One. I do not have the strength to wait. There is nothing to hope for. Why should I be patient? Wow, I wonder how many of us have been in that situation before, where our circumstances have overwhelmed us, and we felt like Job did, and so we question, why, God? Why? It gets even worse. In Job 7:17 to 21. Why do you make people so important and give them so much attention? You examine them every morning and test them every moment. Would you never look away from me or leave me alone even long enough to swallow? If I have sinned, what have I done to you, you watcher of humans? Why have you made me your target? Have I become a heavy load for you? Why don't you pardon my wrongs and forgive my sins? I will soon lie down in the dust of death. Then you will search for me, but I will be no more. Wow, that's a man who's got a real pity party in life. He's suffered. And so he questions God, why? And yet, as we read the book of Job, he takes control of the situation. And from chapters 38 to 42, God gives Job and us a lesson. And he does so in a rapid-fire question and answer time. He asks Job 59 questions. Imagine you're sitting for an exam and 59 questions are asked of you, and imagine that you can't get one of them right. How would you think of yourself? Would you think of yourself as somebody who knew so much, only to be told that you know very little? Yet, as we look at the questions that God asked, here it is. In chapter 38, 1 to 3, we're told, then the Lord answered Job out of a whirlwind. Just not a normal conversation, but out of a whirlwind. And God doesn't take it easy or put his arms around Job, so to speak, and comfort him and settle down and begin to answer all his questions. He doesn't say, look, Job, I know things are not what you expected, but I'm here to tell you things are going to get better. Just trust me. He didn't say that. He didn't pat him on the head and say, look, Job, everything's going to be okay. Just give it a little time. Trust me. Things are going to work out. You watch. He didn't say that. He starts asking questions. In verses 2 and 3, who is this that makes my purpose unclear by saying things that are not true? Be strong like a man. I'll ask you questions. You must answer me. You see, Job's perceptions and our perceptions about God were just making things worse, because he speaks about things he didn't have any knowledge of. And the same is true of us. So much we don't know or understand. And you know what? Dr. Google doesn't help us either. Even with all the AI rubbish that's on there, we don't know or understand God. As one commentator makes the point, God then challenges Job to a wrestling match. The phrase, dress for action like a man, or gird up your loins like a man in the KJV, is an image taken directly from the ancient sport of belt wrestling. In this sport, the contestants would grab each other's belt to throw the other down, with the goal being removing the opponent's belt. And if you like, Job is invited to the mat with Almighty God. In verses 4 and 5, you'll see the questions that are asked up there. Were you there when I made the earth's foundation? Tell me if you understand. Who marked off how big it should be? Surely you know. You stretched a ruler across it. God is eternal, while Job just recently appeared on the scene. In verses 31 to 33, the Almighty has Job gaze at the heavens. He says, can you tie up the stars of Pleiades, or loosen the ropes of the stars in Orion? Can you bring out the stars on time or lead out the stars of the bear and its cubs? Do you know the laws of the sky and understand their rule over the earth? You see, if Job can't move the stars around, then maybe he can make it rain, as in verses 34 and 35. Can you shout an order to the clouds and cover yourself with a flood of water? Can you send lightning bolts on their way? Do they come to you and say, here we are? Pretty strong questions. In chapter 39, God turns to the animal kingdom. And he says, do you know where the mountain goats give birth? Do you observe the calving of the does? God delights in animals, and he made from the awkward ostrich which lays eggs and then can't remember where they are, to the mighty horses that eat up the ground so they can run into battle. He wonders if Job can direct the flight path of hawks and eagles like he does. All of those in chapter 39. Now imagine that's your first test. He's asked a number of questions there. And you know what? Job is stunned. He can't give an answer. He has to admit, I don't know. Now God could have said, okay, Job, let's settle our difference, let's shake hands and go our different ways. But God doesn't. He wants Job to know who is sovereign, who is in control, and who is wise. In chapter 40, verses 1 and 2, he says to Job, will the person who argues with the Almighty correct him? Let the person who accuses God answer him. And God pauses here, just for a second, to allow Job to respond. In verses 4 and 5, Job says, I'm not worthy. I cannot answer you anything, so I'll put my hand over my mouth. I spoke one time, but I'll not answer again. I even spoke 2 times, but I'll say nothing more. You see, Job hasn't got an answer to what God asked in the presence of God, because he's learning that God's persons and plans are greater than he can understand. In verses 7 and 8, he says, be strong like a man. I'll ask you questions. You must answer me. Would you say that I'm unfair? Would you blame me to make yourself look good? Wow, that's getting to the heart of the matter, isn't it? Job has asked enough questions. Now God will do the questioning. And he puts Job on the witness stand. And while Job is quieted, he's not yet convinced. So God grabs his belt and again puts him on his back. God gets to the heart of Job's problem. This had to hurt. Will you even put me in the wrong? Will you condemn me that you might be in the right? While Job's initial reaction to loss in the beginning of the book was that of submissive worship, as his misery increased, his confidence wavered and he began to insist on his own righteousness at the expense of God's justice. Job thought, as we often do, he deserved an answer. That was somehow his right, that God needed to explain himself. What had he done himself was set himself up as judge over God. So God asked this question about Behemoth, which is, whoops, I'll get it yet, which is some sort of dinosaur, it's thought. And he says, can anyone blind its eye and capture it? Can anyone put hooks in its nose? Then he turns to the Leviathan, which could also be a dinosaur, and he asks, can you catch Leviathan on a fish hook or tie his tongue down with a rope? If no one can control what God has created, how can man create or control the Creator? What is Job's response in verses 2? He says, I'm powerless compared to your power and plans. I know that you can do all things and that no plan of yours can be ruined. You ask, who is this that made my purpose unclear by saying things that are not true? Surely I spoke of the things I did not understand. I talked of things too wonderful for me to know. Now don't miss this. Job didn't get all these questions answered, but he did get to know God. He had only heard of God before, but now he sees him in all his splendor and goodness. And finally, he says, my ears have heard of you before, but now my eyes have seen you. So now I hate myself. I will change my heart and life, will sit in the dust and ashes. God not only has great might, he's always right. Job repented of thinking he had the right to judge God. As one commentator says, let God be God and worship him for the sovereign he is, unfolding his glory of his own nature through wrath and mercy, which necessitated evil. This is our God. I tell you this, I don't want to live in a world where evil controls God. No such world exists, but that's the choice you have. You either believe in the God who is in complete control of evil, or you believe evil is in control of God and he's reacting the best way he can. If you believe that, that's not the God of the Bible. And lastly, as we finish, we will finish, the principle expressed. Ultimately, the only answer God gave to Job was himself. It was as if God said, Job, I'm your answer. Learn who I am. When you know me, you'll know how to handle anything. Job wasn't asked to trust a plan. He wasn't asked to put in a formula into place. He was asked to trust a person, a personal God who is in ultimate control and knows what is best for us. He is God and we are not. Now, we could ask in the book of Job, life is unfair, bad things happen. And we could say, where is God when it all hurts? But rather the question is, where is Job when it hurts? Who does he go to? And the same question can be asked of us. When we're hurting, who do we go to? What are we looking for? Who are we searching for? Where will we turn to? The real question is not Job's suffering, but whether he'll trust in the God that is in charge, who knows what he's doing. God basically challenged Job in the only thing he could control, his response. His response was his responsibility. Yours and my response is our responsibility. And blaming God didn't get Job anywhere. He needed to decide how he was going to respond. Were things going to get better for him? Or were things going to become bitter? That was his choice. We can't change our circumstances, but we can certainly change how we respond to them. We need a new view of God and a new view of ourselves. God is in control even when it appears he's not. What we think about God is the most important thing about us. And God's will for each of us includes suffering. Suffering is used to refine us, as we see in Job 23. But he knows the way that I take when he has tried me. What does it say? I shall come out as gold. And Job, for I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. In Psalm 115, verse 3, our God is in heavens and does whatever he pleases. Now, we're not going to know all the answers as to why God allows suffering, but he allows it to happen so that he can have the glory in how he deals with sin. And that takes us to the cross. Because at the cross, Jesus paid the penalty for sin. He paid the price. And as a result, he gives the invitation of whosoever will may come. And it means we exchange our righteousness, our own selves, so that we can have the righteousness of his Son, Jesus Christ. We have a right standing before God. We then have a personal relationship with Almighty God. And he uses the things in our life to draw us to ourselves and to remove, if you like, the stuff that we're hanging on to, that we have buried deep down. He wants it to come out and come clean so that we can be the people we have. Now, evil exists, as we've said. As the critics in the first one said, they say, if evil exists, then there can't be a God. But as we've shown, evil exists because there's a standard that we're given that determines what's right and what's wrong. And that was given by a moral lawgiver. We have to have a standard, and God gave us that standard. And so if there's a standard of good, then we must know what evil looks like. And that standard is given to us by God. So that means God does exist. Now, many challenging things, but we have answers to these questions. And we don't have to hang our heads and say, oh, I don't know. Because God didn't create evil. He permits it. But he deals with it. And one day, he's going to deal with evil forever. He's going to establish his kingdom of righteousness, and his Son will reign and rule in that righteousness. And the inhabitants of earth will be in that righteousness. And so we can look forward to a future. But we have answers from his word. Let's close our service by turning to 149 as we stand to sing just the first verse and chorus of In Times Like